Number 10. In January 2022, Sean Weiss celebrated 2 years of sobriety. Unfortunately, the Mighty Ducks star has had a rough time, who you might not recognize these days since he's 43 years old. The child actor played the goalie Greg Goldberg in the original Mighty Ducks movie in 1992 and the following films throughout the 90s. But between then and now, a whole lot went wrong, mainly hard times and too much meth. Sean was arrested in 2018 for public intoxication, sentenced to 90 days in county jail for possession of meth, and 150 days for stealing merchandise from an electronics store. The teen star was reduced to stealing from department stores just to buy his drugs in his later years. Then he was arrested in January 2020 for breaking into a man's house while he was blitzed out of his mind. He hit complete rock bottom, sick and mentally ill. Everybody gave up on him, and he was left pretty much toothless and housed in an assisted living program. These days, Sean is doing much better. He doesn't look quite as ragged as he did for the past few years, and he even got himself a new set of teeth since the meth rotted out all his natural ones. Number 9. Orlando Brown. Orlando Brown was a Disney child star who grew up in the public eye not too long ago, and just like Sean Weiss, he also went from a Disney prodigy to absolute rock bottom. If you're not sure who Orlando is, then you were probably born too late for That's So Raven and Family Matters. But he also starred in The Jamie Foxx Show and voice acted for Fillmore and The Proud Family. Orlando played in quite a lot of things, from Major Payne in 1995 to Straight Outta Compton in 2015. His problem started in 2008 when he vanished for 24 hours and missed a day of meetings. And that was just the beginning. Drugs, violence, and run-ins with the law followed. In 2016, he got in trouble for punching his girlfriend in the face in a parking lot in Torrance, California. Next, he was busted with methamphetamine and brought up on charges of possession with the intent to sell. This was bad news, considering that Brown had gotten a DUI and was already tangled in the justice system just years earlier. Then, in 2018, he was taken into custody because he never showed up for his court date. Fast forward to 2021, Orlando Brown turned his life around. He graduated from a treatment center, is totally sober, and turned himself into a faith-based rapper dedicated to Jesus. Number 8. Johnshell Alexander. Johnshell Alexander was 22 years old when she died in 2021. Johnshell was just a kid being cast in the movie Beasts of the Southern Wild 10 years before. This low-budget film, directed by Ben Zeitlin, turned into a major hit. Alexander played the character of Joy Strong, and the movie was nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. This propelled the 12-year-old girl straight into the spotlight. Sadly, the spotlight faded. The child star went on with her life, never had another role, and her popularity dried up. She became just another Louisiana native trying to live her life. Then, as she was sitting in a car with a man on a Saturday night in New Orleans, an unidentified person walked up and shot her to death through the window. It's been over a year, we still don't know who killed her, why she was specifically targeted by a deranged gunman, or what's happening. The story blew up for about 3 days, the news cycle carried on, and there hasn't been a single update on the case since. Once a promising star, now an unsolved murder case. Number 7. Jake Lloyd. Jake Lloyd played Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, which came out in 1999. But Jake had made his acting debut 3 years earlier on the TV show ER at just 7 years old. He also was in the movie Apollo 11, in the Christmas hit Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and in the TV show The Pretender. He had a whirlwind career until he was about 10 years old. Then, after playing Anakin, his career basically imploded. It was the beginning of the end. The last thing he would do as a professional actor was the voice of Anakin in the video game Star Wars: Racer Revenge in 2002. When asked why he vanished from the spotlight, Jake said it was because he got bullied at school for being Anakin Skywalker, probably by jealous kids who wished they could have been in Star Wars instead. But then, after school, Jake was pretty much unremarkable. He did nothing of any interest and didn't get any time in the news, at least not until 2015. That was when the police were called to his mom's house because Jake had first verbally assaulted her, then beat her up. It turned out Jake had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had turned abusive against his mother. He was off his meds and out of his mind. Later that same year, he was arrested in South Carolina for reckless driving. He got into a car chase with the cops that only ended when he crashed into some trees. He then spent 10 months in jail before being transferred to a psychiatric facility. Number 6. Tom Guiry. Tom Guiry, the former child star who played in the hit movie The Sandlot as the character Scott Smalls back in 1993, has found himself in quite a bit of trouble. After the movie, he never really had much success, but he certainly made headlines in 2013. He was arrested for headbutting a police officer at the Bush Intercontinental Airport in Houston. According to the Houston Chronicle, it started at about 6:45 p.m. United Airlines called the cops because a passenger was too wasted to fly. What happened next was an alcohol-fueled fit. As the cops tried to give him a break to see if they could get him sober enough to just go on with his business, he wanted to fight them. He attempted to kick an officer in the face, missed, then headbutted him instead. Tom was promptly arrested and carried out of the airport. Later, he posted a $5,000 bail and was let out. It was the most attention Tom had gotten since the 90s. Number 5. Henry Thomas. Henry Thomas started his career with one of the biggest movies in cinema history. He was the kid from E.T., the extraterrestrial, in 1982. As a young kid in the 80s, Henry was not prepared for what was about to happen to him. He was inducted into fame pretty much against his will and thrown into the spotlight. People would scream at him on the street and point and say, "Hey, it's the kid from E.T." But his career came to a slow and painful halt because of his mother. She was labeled as difficult to work with, and that rubbed off on Henry. He couldn't get the significant roles he wanted and had to star in small-time family affairs. Then, when Henry turned 18, he made a dramatic switch to R-rated movies. He starred in Murder 1, Valmont, and even the third sequel to the 1960 Alfred Hitchcock movie, Psycho. Henry appeared in Gangs of New York and Legends of the Fall in more recent memory, but he never really reached stardom as he did in 1982. Plus, he turned into an ordinary adult with his own crummy problems. In 2019, at 48 years old, the former child star was booked into the Washington County Jail. He was caught driving drunk in Oregon. The police received a call about a car that was just sitting on the road, not going anywhere. When the police officers arrived, they found Thomas slumped in the front seat, totally wasted. Number 4. Joey Gados Jr. Joey Gados Jr. played Zach Mooneyham in the 2003 movie School of Rock. It's arguably one of Jack Black's most significant films of all time, and he shows up to teach a bunch of youngsters how to rock and roll. But there's not much rock and roll in Joey's life these days. In 2019, at 27 years old, he faced charges of theft in Florida. Joey got caught in 4 separate incidents, stealing guitars and selling them in pawn shops. What makes this so ironic is that Joey played a musician in the 2003 movie. He also considers himself a musician and a serious guitarist, and maybe that was why he felt compelled to walk into shops, ask to test a specific guitar, and then run away with it. He stole a Gibson Les Paul worth $1,900 and a Fender Stratocaster worth $700. He also stole some guitar amps and ripped off his father. According to the police, Joey was stealing this stuff to feed his drug addiction. Sadly, Joey never starred in another movie. His role in School of Rock would be his only one, and while we don't know exactly what happened since the movie came out in 2003, it looks like Joey has gone down a dangerous path of drugs, theft, and time in jail. Number 3. Amanda Bynes. In 2014, Amanda Bynes was arrested for a DUI, but it was hardly her first encounter with the law. In just 12 months, the child star threw a bong out of an apartment window, completed 4 months in rehab, got a DUI, and then became a fashionable college student. The incident with the bong happened in May 2013 and ended with her being arrested, but the charges were ultimately dropped. Then, 3 months later, she started a fire out on the driveway of some house in California, and then was arrested carrying her pet dog into a store covered in gasoline. That was when she spent the 3 months rehabilitating herself in the psychiatric treatment center. Amanda Bynes became wildly famous as a kid in the 1990s and 2000s. She starred in her own show. Amanda's been in plenty of movies, but she's kind of become a train wreck as an adult. She has a face tattoo, which she is in the process of removing, and she's hardly recognizable these days. And in 2022, a rather disturbing nude photo of Amanda appeared online. However, Amanda denies the nude photograph of her in a bathtub is indeed her, and says it's some random woman trying to ruin her life. Basically, Amanda's only fame these days is not being all over the tabloids. Number 2. Drake Bell. Drake Bell starred in shows on Nickelodeon like Drake and Josh. He was a big name for a long time, but not anymore. In 2021, he was given 2 years of probation and ordered to complete 200 hours of community service. At 35 years old, he was making some pretty poor decisions. You might call Drake an outright disgusting piece of trash, because Drake didn't get caught drinking and driving. He wasn't in a domestic dispute. Instead, he was brought up on a felony charge of attempting to endanger a child. Drake was busted and pleaded guilty to exchanging messages with a minor. It really doesn't get any more disgusting than that. Once a child star, and now a pervert on the loose. He should have been thrown in jail but got away with nothing but probation and some lousy community service. As for the case, it gets pretty outrageous. The victim claimed she began exchanging messages with Drake online back in 2017. She was only 15 years old. He was a grown man. The messages eventually became wildly inappropriate. Then, after she attended one of his concerts, he took her backstage, and the two got physical. After the incident, the victim realized the situation wasn't appropriate, so she went to the police and filed a report in 2018, and now Drake is forever shamed as a deviant and will probably never get work again. Number 1. Lindsay Lohan. It would take far too long to list everything Lindsay Lohan has ever been in. She was a star from a young age, appearing in everything from Freaky Friday to Mean Girls. But as Lindsay got older, her life got more complicated. There's no child celebrity more synonymous with the word train wreck than Lindsay Lohan. Her first arrest came in May 2007. She was busted driving drunk and being in possession of cocaine. She lost control of her Mercedes-Benz and crashed in Beverly Hills. After her arrest, she went to rehab. She was released after 45 days. And in July of that same year, she got busted driving under the influence yet again. She was caught chasing after a woman with her vehicle after they had gotten into an intoxicated argument. This was just 2 weeks after she left rehab. And the charges keep mounting. In 2011, Lindsay received a charge of felony grand theft for stealing a $2,500 necklace from a jewelry store in Venice. She was given 120 days in jail, but released after just spending 5 hours in prison. Talk about a star treatment. She was arrested again in 2012 for a hit and run after she ran somebody over in front of a New York hotel. But again, she escaped all charges and any punishment. The only good news is that Lindsay never really got in any more major trouble after that. And these days, she seems to be just minding her own business and staying out of the spotlight.
9. Princess gone wrong. According to authorities, in 2013, 42-year-old Michelle Alibon was released in California after posting an enormous bailout sum of $5 million the very next day after her arrest. She is one of Saudi Prince Abdulrahman bin Nasser bin Abdulaziz Al Saud's 6 wives, making her a Saudi princess. Her charge: she was accused of human trafficking. Following her release, officials imposed tight travel restrictions and GPS surveillance to keep her movements in check. The arrest followed allegations made by a 30-year-old Kenyan housemaid who claimed to be held by the princess against her will. District Attorney Tony Rakokas claimed the complainant was subjected to forced labor and compared Alibon to a slave master. Alibon is prohibited from contacting the alleged victim, cannot leave Orange County without court approval, and must surrender her passport. Authorities say the captive maid could only flee, flag down a bus, and call the cops when the family brought her along for a vacation in the United States. The maid did not realize that her escape had helped 4 others gain their freedom as well. On searching the family's condo, police found 4 other Filipino workers who voluntarily walked out to their freedom upon being found. On the other hand, despite being charged with a serious accusation of human trafficking, the princess walked away unscathed, thanks to her wealth. 8. High-profile murder. In 2013, Aurea Vasquez Rijos was accused of hiring someone to assassinate her wealthy Canadian husband on the U.S. Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. She had been on the run for 5 long years, but Spanish authorities finally caught her at a Madrid airport. It all started in September 2005, while Aurea was walking through a tourist area with her husband, 32-year-old real estate developer Adam Anhang. An attacker came out of nowhere and stabbed Adam to death. 3 years later, Aurea was accused of paying a man $3 million to kill her husband. She denied the claims and refused to negotiate with investigators. She fled to Italy, where she lived in Florence, and then moved to Venice. Aurea refused to cooperate with detectives after Anhang's death and instead filed a civil complaint against her late husband's family, seeking $1 million in losses and millions more from his estate. Meanwhile, a Puerto Rican man was wrongfully convicted for the high-profile murder and spent 8 months behind bars in a supermax prison. He was finally released when Alex Pabon Colon, the hitman hired by Aurea, showed up and told authorities everything. Aurea found Colon at a restaurant and hired him to kill her husband for $3 million. She asked him to make it look like a mugging gone wrong. The fact that Adam was seeking to divorce Aurea after only 6 months into their marriage must have stirred her to take the extreme step. It took a massive collaboration between the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Puerto Rico, Spanish cops, Interpol, and the U.S. Department of Justice to get Aurea arrested for the involvement of the murder. 14 years later, in 2019, Aurea finally pled guilty and will spend the rest of her life in a Fort Worth, Texas prison. 7. Love triangle. In 2012, Nanette Ann Packard was found guilty of convincing her lover, former NFL linebacker Eric Napolsky, to murder her millionaire boyfriend for his life insurance money. 17 long years after the crime, jurors found 46-year-old Packard from Southern California guilty of first-degree murder in the shooting of her sugar daddy, William McLaughlin. who was 21 years her senior. McLaughlin was shot 6 times in the torso with a 9mm handgun after returning home from a quick trip to Vegas on his private plane. Hearing the gunfire, his mentally disabled son ran downstairs to discover his father lying in a pool of blood. In a 911 call for assistance, the son's agonized pleas for help were recorded. Packard and Napolsky were suspected of murdering McLaughlin from the very beginning, especially after detectives discovered they were having an affair behind McLaughlin's back, and that Packard was writing checks to herself from the millionaire's accounts. In 1995, the two were questioned, but there wasn't enough evidence to arrest them for the death. Packard did eventually plead guilty to fraud and grand theft. It was later found that she was the sole beneficiary of McLaughlin's $1 million life insurance policy and an additional $150,000 from his will, with complete access to his beach house. The murder investigation went cold, but in 2009, Larry Montgomery, the district attorney's investigator, reopened the investigation. He studied old case files, re-interviewed witnesses, and re-examined all the evidence, and thanks to DNA developments, was able to pinpoint the suspects. Packard and Napolsky now faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. 6. You can't arrest me. I'm rich. In May 2015, 42-year-old Nicole Hutcherson was charged with intoxication and manslaughter after crashing her car into a road worker on the North Central Expressway, instantly killing him. When cops moved in to arrest her, she told them that they would regret charging her with anything because she was so wealthy. Nicole told police she was driving to her boyfriend's residence at 1 a.m. when she saw 3 men working on the shoulder of the expressway. She tried to swerve around Bernard Armstrong, the victim, who jumped in front of her car, but she lost control and crashed into the concrete wall. However, investigators do not buy her story. 60-year-old Bernard Armstrong, who suffered massive internal injuries, was operating a crash cushion truck, which is meant to alert and slow down traffic, on the night of the fatal accident. Armstrong had just stepped off his truck and stood beside it along the shoulder when Nicole's car rammed into him. According to the arrest warrant, Nicole failed the field sobriety test. She had red, bloodshot eyes, staggered while walking, and cops could smell alcohol on her breath. Nicole behaved aggressively and threatened the cops with dire circumstances if they arrested her. Her attorney defended her, saying that she was in shock after the closed head injuries she had suffered in the crash. But the police at the scene recall Nicole being more worried about her 2 dogs in the car than the man she had crashed into. Nicole Hutcherson was released after posting a $50,000 bond from the Dallas County Jail. She was then found not guilty and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. Despite all the claims of being wealthy, she listed her income at $1,500 a month. 5. Holding captive. In December 2021, an unnamed victim who was held captive for over 6 months managed to escape thanks to a single text message to her friend that she was being held captive. The friend alerted the cops, who immediately started investigating the case. Cops made it to 39-year-old Ramon Marcia Martinez's home in Utah, who answered the door holding a handgun in the front pocket of his hoodie. According to the affidavit, Martinez was arrested at his house when cops found the victim with bruising around both eyes. She also complained of rib pain and difficulty in breathing. She informed authorities she had been assaulted nearly 6 times on the previous day alone. The affidavit also contained other details of the torture. It read, "At another time, he seized the victim by the throat and held a knife to it. Using the knife, Martinez carved the number 6 into the victim's left hand, claiming that she had 6 months to accept him or be killed. Finally, the victim indicated that Martinez got a revolver and held it at her head at some point during the day. She also said he beat her with a bat and choked her so hard she urinated twice. Martinez, the self-proclaimed millionaire who lists himself as the CEO of True Med, a medical cannabis doctor referral service, was charged with aggravated kidnapping and assault and held in prison without bail. 4. The failed plan. Officers claim a millionaire plotted to kidnap his estranged wife, but the plan went awry when the two men he hired drowned near Baton Rouge while attempting to evade cops. Lawrence Michael Hadley was charged with aggravated kidnapping, which carries a maximum life sentence in prison. According to court records, the couple got married in 2006, but things got ugly in 2017 when restraining orders were repeatedly issued. Handley asked for a divorce in April of 2017. He claimed that his wife had regularly abused or threatened him and that she had hired a contract killer to get rid of him. Handley's wife maintains that he had tried to track her phone, gain access to her email, and install malware on her computer. According to records, he allegedly also sent her abusive text messages to threaten her. Handley enlisted the help of two criminals, 27-year-old Sylvester Bracey and Arsenio Hayes. According to the court complaint, kidnappers forced themselves into the couple's Lafayette home with handguns, chained Handley's wife up, threw a sack over her head, before forcibly removing her from the home. According to the affidavit, the two men then threatened, tortured, and abused her while driving to their destination. The intruders also handcuffed the neighbor and her child, who were present in the home, and drove off to Baton Rouge with the wife inside. An off-duty deputy pursued the van after he spotted it trying to flee on the shoulder. The men made a grave mistake when they took a wrong turn into a dead end. Bracey and Hayes bolted towards the nearby woods after the van got bogged in a swampy location. They jumped into the Intercoastal Canal to escape an arrest and were discovered dead a day later. Authorities found a gun in a nearby pipe that they suspect belonged to one of the kidnappers. Handley's wife was found in the back of the vehicle by Iberville Parish Sheriff's deputies. After learning that his plan had failed, Handley tried to charter a plane and flee the country. However, by then, investigators had labeled Handley as the mastermind behind the kidnapping when they found a video detailing his plan with checklists to execute the abduction of his wife. Handley, who had tasted the success of being a millionaire before he was 30, is looking at a possible 15 to 35 years for attempted murder and a maximum sentence of 20 years for second-degree kidnapping. 3. The cost of life. A multimillionaire's son was jailed for slamming a high-speed Lamborghini into a Los Angeles woman, killing her. According to police, 17-year-old Brendan Guiry was driving a Lamborghini SUV and had allegedly been street racing with an Audi when it drove into Monique Munoz's vehicle. Munoz's automobile was wrecked and she had to be cut free. Brendan's father, James Guiry, has faced a barrage of criticism for gifting his son a $200,000 Lamborghini for his birthday in 2020. Not only that, Brendan drew a lot of attention after a celebrity magazine reported that a few days after the accident, there was an incident in Beverly Hills. An armed guard surrounded Brendan when an unidentified person screamed at him and called him a killer. Brendan was supposedly laughing and joking as if nothing was wrong, and his demeanor was casual and unnerving amid the devastation his family had experienced just days earlier. After reaching an $18.85 million settlement, Guiry allegedly spent loads more on trying to erase the incident from the internet. The Los Angeles Police Department has charged the son with negligent vehicular manslaughter. The proceedings are still underway. 2. The revenge. In 2021, the wealthiest man in Britain, 83-year-old Richard Sutton, was stabbed to death at his house in Higher Langham by his business partner's son. The Moore Hill estate was left looking like a war zone following the murderous rampage. 34-year-old Thomas Schreiber has been charged with Sutton's murder and attempted murder. Schreiber also tried to kill his own mother. After years of hatred and resentment brewed inside him, which ultimately led to the explosion of violence. After mooching off Richard Sutton for years, Schreiber stabbed him to death with a kitchen knife in a frenzied attack. Schreiber stabbed his own mother 9 times in the neck and back, leaving her paralyzed from the neck down. Schreiber lived with the couple at the mansion rent-free following his mother's divorce from his alcoholic father. But despite this, the court heard how he resented them for abandoning his father, who died in 2013. During the trial, Rose McCarthy, Schreiber's sister, told him, "You took a knife to our world." 1. Daddy's Girl. With her father's blessing, a millionaire's 21-year-old daughter spent the ludicrous amount of $100,000 on cosmetic procedures. And she says she's not done. Saffron Druitt Barlow received lip fillers at age 16 because she was unsatisfied with her appearance. After being targeted by cruel trolls who branded her flat-chested and looked like a boy, she spent around $50,000 on breast implants last month that boosted her 34 AA bust to something like a full C. Tony and Barry Druitt Barlow, Saffron's parents, made history in the late 1980s when they became the first gay men in the UK to father children through surrogacy. The Essex couple made headlines again in 1999 when they were photographed cuddling Saffron and her twin, Aspen. In an interview with The Sun, Saffron revealed that Barry supported her decision to have cosmetic surgery and even informed her that she would regret not going bigger with her latest boob job. After Tony gifted her a whopping $15 million to celebrate a financial windfall, Saffron, who turned 21 in December, is treating herself to a $30,000 Brazilian butt lift. Nine. Anastasia Kvitka. Igor Kvitka is a former Ukrainian member of parliament, MP, and a wealthy uranium tycoon. He has had close business ties with the country's Minister of the Interior, Arsen Avakov, since the early 1990s. In late March, about a month after Russia invaded Ukraine, news headlines reported that Kotvitska's glamorous wife, Anastasia Kvitka, crossed the border into Hungary. She went on foot with tens of millions of dollars in cash in several suitcases. She was traveling with her mother and 2 Hungarian men. Reports claim that Hungarian customs officials discovered the money, mostly in euros and US dollars, after Anastasia failed to declare it while entering the country at a refugee checkpoint. As a result, officials opened a criminal investigation into the suspiciously sizable sum of cash. In addition, many officials are now calling for an inquiry into the conduct of Ukrainian border patrol agents. Authorities suspect them of turning a blind eye to the large amounts of money that have been leaving the country in recent months. A businessman from Kyiv named Sayar Kushatov revealed the Kotvitska incident. He accused customs officers of taking bribes from people for carrying cash out of Ukraine. Kushatov told the press that this also goes on in other countries. He adds that the names of border agents who will take part are well known among the elite few who have the funds they need to smuggle them from one place to another. 8. Ray Nagin. Ray Nagin was the mayor of New Orleans when Hurricane Katrina struck the city in August 2005. Months later, as devastated local communities tried to rebuild, Nagin was busy operating a bribery and kickback scheme. The scam benefited him financially in exchange for favoritism towards specific individuals and businesses vying for construction and other contracts. The fraud came at the cost of the city coffers and its residents and provided Nagin with money, personal services, free travel, and more. His dirty deeds went unnoticed for some time. He was re-elected for a second term as mayor the following year in 2006. Then in 2009, the public and law enforcement caught on to Nagin's corruption. That year, a Times-Picayune journalist alleged that the mayor's friend, Greg Meffett, paid for Nagin's plane ticket to a 2004 trip to Hawaii using a contractor's credit card. It soon came to light that Nagin had taken many other free trips that were paid for by a company owned by city vendor Mark St. Pierre. Prosecutors accused at least 3 individuals of bribing a public official for their substantial contributions to Nagin's mayoral campaign and pocketbook. In the meantime, authorities investigated Nagin for deleting numerous emails. They used many against him in a federal criminal trial. The courts convicted him on 20 of 21 corruption-related charges, including wire fraud, conspiracy, bribery, money laundering, filing false tax returns, and more. A judge sentenced him to 10 years at a prison camp in Texarkana, Texas, but they released him in early 2020 because of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Although Nagin was required to serve some time under house arrest, it was probably a welcomed change for the 63-year-old, who at least gets to live in comfort despite his restrictions. 7. Commercial court corruption. Police in the tiny Balkan country of Montenegro recently arrested nearly a dozen officials, including the president of the country's commercial court, Blazo Jovanic, for allegedly running a criminal organization and abusing their positions of office. The case began when the Montenegrin special state prosecutor suspected the group of illicit activity. The arrest marked a significant milestone for Prime Minister Dritan Abazovic, who previously said that he was dedicated to fighting the country's ongoing problems with organized crime. He told the media that Montenegro has a history of corrupt authorities looting the public coffers and committing immoral deeds. Abazovic said it was time to hold people responsible for their participation in these crimes. Before the arrest, authorities searched Jovanic's office while officers stood guard outside the court building where he was headquartered. Police declined to comment on the case, but the press reported that Jovanic had founded a criminal organization that had drained the public coffers of tens of millions of euros, putting enormous, needless strain on the state's already struggling economy. Jovanic has been involved in government for years. He was a judge before he became the first elected head of the commercial court in 2014, and he was re-elected 5 years later. The disgraced official has long-standing ties to the country's president, Milo Djukanovic, and to the country's Democratic Party of Socialists, DPS. It's unclear how far back his corruption activities go. The Montenegrin government is fraught with morally questionable behavior, but there seems to be a growing number of officials intent on bringing these harmful activities to an end. 6. Gajik Kakatrian. The U.S. Justice Department is making moves to try seizing a multi-million-dollar Los Angeles mansion that they claim was purchased with the money paid to a politician. They're accusing former Armenian Finance Minister Gajik Karkachian of using ill-gotten funds to buy the French chalet-style home in the prestigious Holmby Hills neighborhood for $63.5 million. He purchased the sprawling 33,652 square foot mansion in 2011. But it wasn't until recently that the Justice Department revealed that Khachatryan and his 2 sons allegedly funded the purchase with money they received from a businessman named Sidrak Arustamyan for favorable tax treatment. Of course, this violates Armenian law, and the U.S. feds seem more than happy to try holding Khachatryan responsible for his corrupt dealings. The homeowner recently put the mansion on the market, and viewings are still being held despite ongoing legal scrutiny. It's near the Playboy Mansion and has 11 bedrooms, 24 bathrooms, a theater, pool, wine cellar, and maid's quarters. Real estate agency Hilton and Highland told the Los Angeles Times that even though the law has gotten involved, the home can still be sold as long as the seller and the Justice Department agree on a sale price after receiving an offer. Neither Karkatrian, Arustamian, nor anyone representing them has commented, and the investigation is ongoing. 5. Roger Ng. 49-year-old Roger Ng is a former Goldman Sachs executive who recently went down in history for helping to mastermind one of the biggest financial fraud schemes in history. Before he went rogue, he was the bank's top investor in Malaysia. From 2009 to 2015, he helped embezzle as much as $4.5 billion raised through 1MDB, a sovereign wealth fund that helped the country's poor. The money was diverted to government officials, bankers, and other associates of the scam, leaving just $1.5 billion to benefit Malaysia's impoverished civilians. Some funds went to Malaysian playboy Ho Lo, who bought lavish apartments, yachts, expensive artwork, and other frivolous luxury goods. Goldman Sachs ended up paying nearly $3 billion in fines in the U.S. and almost $4 billion to the Malaysian government. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice prosecuted Ng for his role in the scheme. His former boss, Tim Leisner, who had pleaded guilty to similar charges in 2018, testified against Ng at his trial. Defense lawyers poked some holes in Leisner's credibility, but a jury ultimately found Ng guilty of conspiring to launder money and violating an anti-corruption law. He now faces up to 30 years in federal prison. 4. Francois and Penelope Fon. After serving as French Prime Minister from 2007 to 2012 under President Nicolas Sarkozy, Francois Charles Armand Fillon ran for president in 2017. But his campaign plummeted when allegations of corruption surfaced against Fillon. In a scandal known as Penelope Gate, he was accused of setting his wife Penelope up with high-paying fake jobs. Mrs. Fillon allegedly received more than $842,060 over 15 years while working, but not really, as her husband and his stand-in, Marc Julan's parliamentary assistant and a literary assistant. Fillon continued his candidacy even after falling under legal scrutiny despite promises to quit the campaign if he was prosecuted. He accused his competition of spreading rumors, but there's no evidence that this was ever the case. Instead, authorities carried out search warrants and a lengthy investigation, and in 2020, Fillon went on trial. He was convicted of fraud and misuse of funds later that year and was sentenced to 5 years in prison with 3 years suspended. Fillon appealed, but the court upheld his conviction. As a result, he's barred from holding public office for a decade, and Penelope also received a prison sentence. In addition, the former president, his wife, and Julan were ordered to repay over $1,055,000 to the French government. 3. The Odebrecht Scandal. Some of Latin America's most important infrastructure projects were built by the Brazilian-based construction giant Grupo Odebrecht. Few people outside the region have ever heard of the company, which started as a small family-owned business during the 1940s. But it grew rapidly and gained a sizable multinational presence. At its peak in 2010, Odebrecht had around 181,000 employees across 21 countries. It also donates large sums of money to Brazilian politicians. It is one of the dozens of companies that have been accused of bribing high-ranking officials for contracts with the petroleum corporation Petrobras. Marcelo Odebrecht, the company's executive and the grandson of its founder, was arrested in connection with a scandal in 2015. Dozens more arrests of other company officials followed. As things currently stand, detectives are investigating suspected bribery in 10 countries, including Argentina, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela. As part of a leniency deal reached with U.S. and Swiss authorities in 2016, Odebrecht agreed to pay $2.6 billion in fines in the largest ever settlement. In addition, the company has tried to reach agreements with other governments to settle cases, helping to keep its construction rights in those countries. Several Odebrecht executives have fessed up to their roles in the massive scheme. The biggest confession came from former boss Marcelo Odebrecht, who admitted to illegally donating $48 million to Brazilian presidential candidates Dilma Rousseff and Michel Temer in 2014. But not all confessions are reliable because confessing often leads to a cozy deal with prosecutors, and investigators have their work cut out to determine what's true and what's not. Some Petrobras executives involved in the scandal have already reached favorable plea bargains that allow them to serve out their sentences at home rather than behind bars. But their lives are highly restricted, and house arrest is anything but a vacation. 2. Young Thug and Gunna. Prosecutors in Fulton County, Georgia, are accusing Atlanta-based rappers Young Thug and Gunna of co-founding a violent street gang that committed many carjackings, shootings, and murders over a decade. They cited lyrics from the musicians' songs as evidence of their alleged crimes in an 88-page indictment that claims the men targeted other high-profile rappers. Young Thug, whose legal name is Jeffrey Lamar Williams, rose to stardom in 2019 when he wrote a song with Childish Gambino called This Is America. According to prosecutors, the song became the first hip-hop track to win the Song of the Year Grammy. By then, he was already well into his gang life, who alleged that Young Thug and two co-conspirators founded the street gang Young Slime Life, or YSL, in 2012. The gang has connections to the Notorious Bloods and is infamous for committing brutal acts of violence. Young Thug's lawyer, Brian Steele, maintains his client's innocence and says that Williams has committed no crime whatsoever. Gunna turned himself into the Fulton County Jail after Young Thug's arrest. A third rapper named in the indictment, Christian Eppinger, was already locked up for shooting a police officer when he was slapped with additional charges for his alleged participation in the YSL gang. During a news conference, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis cited the case as an example of the country's intolerance for crime, regardless of an individual's status of fame. 1. FCRA corruption case. In recent weeks, law enforcement officials from India's Central Bureau of Investigations, CBI, have raided 40 locations throughout the country as part of an ongoing investigation into the corruption of the country's Ministry of Home Affairs, MHA. 14 individuals have been arrested so far, including 6 officials from MHA's Foreigners Division, who allegedly helped NGOs, non-government organizations, illegally get clearance to operate. During the raids, detectives recovered many incriminating documents, cell phones, and other evidence pointing towards the suspect's guilt. 36 accused individuals have been named in the case, including 7 officials from the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, FCRA department, which provides clearances to NGOs. The operation was sophisticated, occurring at some of the highest levels of government and employing various middlemen who helped NGO clients get their backdoor FCRA registrations. And the scheme was a two-way street. The NGOs procured fake invoices for the division to justify any cost. Of course, the public servants who took part in the scam took bribes. Investigators caught at least 2 officials delivering and accepting bribes. More arrests followed the raids, and the suspects must now answer for their alleged crimes in court. Thanks for watching. Would you prefer to find out that a president you voted for illegally pocketed millions of dollars at the taxpayer's expense, or see a candidate you don't trust win an election? Let us know in the comments below.